Thank you very much for your invitation. I've been really enjoying this session so far, listening to all the fantastic talks. Let me know if you have any issues seeing my slide.
There's no issue. We can see your slide.
Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to talk about Alzheimer's disease and driving, and how we're leveraging mobile technology and artificial intelligence to expand our diagnostic toolkit for Alzheimer's disease. And let me start by introducing our team, the Health City Lab at the University of Calgary. Our mission is to better understand the relationship between people and their environments and what this relationship really tells us about people's health. So we take an ecological approach to research and believe that how people interact with their environment tells us a lot about their health and about their well-being. So our work lies at the intersection of engineering, computer science, neurology, and psychology. And a great focus of our work has been on using behavioral biomarkers to detect Alzheimer's disease. And this is the area that I'm going to talk to you about today. So before I go into any of these studies, I wanted to talk about the motivations. We all know that the world population is growing and it's aging. And since age is the highest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, we're also witnessing more and more people being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. In fact, by the time I finish this sentence, one more person has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Currently, there are no effective treatments or cures for Alzheimer's disease. That means that it is not very possible to reverse the pathophysiological process of Alzheimer's disease. So what's really critical in our fight against Alzheimer's is to detect it early on. And the earlier we diagnose Alzheimer's, the more effective treatment options will be in slowing the progress of the disease. The current gold standard assessments of biological Alzheimer's are now obtained from imaging biomarkers or cerebrospinal fluid biomarkers. But these measurements, as you can imagine, have many challenges in widespread use. They are often very costly. They impose burden on the individuals and participants, and they're not accessible everywhere. They're unavailable in many rural settings and different geographical settings. So in order to really address these challenges, the field is looking for valid technological solutions to diagnose Alzheimer's disease at its earliest stages. For many years, Alzheimer's disease was associated with dementia stage of the disease, which is really the tail end of this pathophysiological process that lasts about 3 decades, 30 years. But we now know that this process begins with a stage of preclinical Alzheimer's. And this stage captures individuals who are asymptomatic, so they don't have clinical symptoms, but are at higher risk of developing symptomatic Alzheimer's disease because they have underlying biological process present. This preclinical stage of Alzheimer's disease can last about 20 years. And then it's followed by the symptomatic stage of Alzheimer's disease, where we have both biological process present and we have the clinical symptom present. One interesting statistic that I wanted to share was that 3 out of 10 older adults have preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and 1 has symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. So this is affecting a lot of the older adult population now. And then neuropathologically speaking, the 2 major hallmarks of biological Alzheimer's disease are the deposition of amyloid beta plaques and formation of phosphorylated tau. So, and we're going to talk about how these measures are usually assessed. So originally in post-mortem autopsy examinations, researchers saw that some individuals with normal cognitive performance had features of Alzheimer's disease according to amyloid plaques or tangles. Currently, though, we can analyze Alzheimer's disease in vivo using biomarkers that are assessed in two different categories. We have fluid biomarkers, which are assessed through cerebrospinal fluid or blood biomarkers, and we have imaging biomarkers, which are assessed from PET or MRI scans. And these biomarkers are now providing reliable and quantitative measures that can support early and accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. But one thing that's interesting about this preclinical stage of Alzheimer's disease is that it has subtle functional signatures as well. So although these subtle signatures may go unnoticed and undetected, they can, in fact, impact complex daily behaviors, including driving and other complex activities of daily living. Currently, there are reliable measures for all activities of daily living at stages of mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. And these measures have been linked to Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, but we really don't have a fully objective measure that have the potential to detect the earliest functional deficits in preclinical stage. So with that being said, complex activities of daily living, when captured continuously and characterized accurately, can have the potential to serve as behavioral markers to identify preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And this is the area that we have focused on. So one of these complex activities is driving, and driving is really a highly complex and dynamic activity that requires rapid and simultaneous deployment of sensory systems like vision, hearing, and touch, motor system like grip, or cognitive system like memory and divided attention. In fact, we know that people with symptomatic Alzheimer's disease have faster rate of decline in driving performance, which is more accelerated when Alzheimer's disease is more severe. Alzheimer's disease also confers an increased risk of motor vehicle crashes and higher likelihood of failing a road test or having a crash during a simulator test. And a lot of these findings also extend to mild cognitive impairment and very early symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. But what about preclinical Alzheimer's disease? So studies have begun to use Alzheimer's disease biomarkers to study the effect of preclinical Alzheimer's disease on driving decline among cognitively normal older adults. They have shown that higher biomarker levels were associated with increased number of driving errors on road tests, which suggests that people with preclinical AD have worse driving performance. And they also show that people with preclinical Alzheimer's disease more quickly receive marginal or fail rating on road tests after passing the road test at a baseline. And this is compared to those without preclinical Alzheimer's disease as defined by biomarkers. But what's really important here is that there's no difference between the groups in cognitive functioning on composite scores. So, and a hypothesis is that the accumulation of amyloid and tau pathology may impair complex processing across multiple brain regions that is required to sustain safe driving. So with that being said, driving again may serve as an important functional marker to better track changes in preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And I really like this diagram here that shows that driving changes may even begin before cognitive changes begin. And I think that's the key here in our studies. So now I'm going to shift gear a little bit and talk about how driving is usually assessed among older adults with Alzheimer's disease. Usually, road tests and driving simulators are conventional tools used to estimate crash risk or evaluate driving performance among older adults. But because driving is an overlearned task, control conditions, so in road tests and in simulators, may not really reflect driving as it occurs on a daily basis. So these methods that has been used so far have some limitations. So although driving simulators preserve safety of the drivers, they are typically single-site dedicated measure. The participants in these studies may develop simulator sickness, which is even more likely among older adults. There are higher costs associated with simulator studies because of the equipment and maintenance, and there's some concerns about validity and reliability across different brands and different models. Similarly, road tests have some limitations. They include the use of an unfamiliar vehicle, and people often have to drive on unfamiliar roads. And there's issue with performance anxiety, so poor performance because someone's watching you, but there's also the Hawthorne effect where you might perform better because someone is watching you and examining you. And there's some issues with reliability of the evaluators and scoring system that is being used. So because of these limitations, the field of driving research is shifting to collecting naturalistic outcomes using instruments and sensors that can collect data on daily driving behaviors. So this naturalistic driving methodology is a method characterized by continuous recording of driving information using advanced sensors under real-world conditions. So considering this, in our studies, we're going to use naturalistic driving methodology to collect high-fidelity in vivo naturalistic driving data. That includes data from inertial sensors, GPS-related information from location, and other driving performance metrics, such as braking, acceleration, and many other things. And I'm going to go into more detail on that later on. But considering what was discussed so far, the overall objective of this line of research that we're conducting was to develop and test an accurate and feasible and expensive digital neurobehavioral marker based on driving to predict earliest identification of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to go into two main studies here. The first one examines the extent to which everyday naturalistic driving behaviors can predict earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease using machine learning. So for this study, participants were enrolled in the DRIVE study and longitudinal studies conducted at the Washington University Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. All of our participants were cognitively normal. They were 65 years old or older. They had valid driver's license. And for this first study, the participants had cerebrospinal fluid collection from which we analyzed CSF biomarkers. So A-beta-42 and A-beta-40 analytes were measured, and we used their ratio to identify individuals with preclinical AD and without preclinical AD, and this is an established threshold that is often used. We also used Cadman genotyping to determine ApoE genotype of the participant because ApoE is one of the highest risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And then we used a naturalistic driving methodology where we installed GPS data loggers that are shown here in this picture into onboard diagnostic port of each participant's vehicle. This recruitment for this study started back in 2015, but for the analysis in this particular study that I'm talking to you about, we only analyzed data from beginning of 2019 to the end of 2019. So this was before pandemics changed our travel behaviors and includes 1 full year of data to account for seasonality. And then This GPS data logger collects information about a range of variables: latitude, longitude, time, number of trips, miles driven, and many other variables that we computed from this raw data. So to examine driving behaviors, we decided on a set of driving metrics that was categorized into two classes. The first class was driving space metrics. These are the variables that we extracted from a life space literature and activities literature in geography and gerontology. And we have 7 variables. The first one was average trip distance, total travel distance, the total number of trips made, entropy or randomness of trips, radius of gyration or typical distance traveled by an individual, number of unique destinations, and total number of trips made after the sunset, so 9 trips. And then the second category was driving performance metrics. And these are the metrics that we saw were in literature were associated with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And these are the metrics that we could really compute from this sparse data that we have collected. These included the number of heartbreaks, sudden accelerations, average speed, average acceleration, average jerk, number of speeding events. So you're speeding more than the posted speed on the road, and underspeeding events. And then we trained 4 random forest models based on 4 sets of inputs. The first one only included age and APOE. The second one included the driving features alone. The third model included driving features and age, and then the fourth model, the most comprehensive model, included driving, age, and APOE. All of our models were trained on 70% of the data and tested on the remaining 30%, and we consider each month's record for participants as an independent data point. So the characteristics of the participants are shown here. The preclinical Alzheimer's disease group was on average older, and they had higher percentages of APOE carrier, which is not surprising. It's expected and seen from the literature. But the two groups really did not differ significantly with regards to sex, race, or years of education, but we didn't really have a very diverse sample, as you can see here. And here are some of the results. The ranked importance scores for each of the features are shown. These results really confirm what we see in the literature, that APOE and age are the 2 most important features for predicting preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And then we saw that the most important driving feature was jerk, which is a measure of smoothness or abruptness of driving, and can be used to measure unsafe or aggressive driving behaviors. And then after that was a number of night trips, radius of gyration, and so on. Here are some of our key findings. You can see the final area under the receiver operating curve for each of the model here. We see that the model with driving features alone achieved highest area under the receiver operating curve score of, sorry, not the highest. It got the AUC score of 82%. The performance of that model was improved when we added age to 94%, and it was further improved to 96 with adding age and APOE. This result is significant because it shows that driving, which is a behavioral measure, can be used to identify preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And another interesting point here is that we achieved comparable performance to plasma A-beta 42 over 40 biomarkers, which are getting a lot of attention now for predicting likelihood of amyloid positivity. The precision recall and a fun score for all of the models are also presented here. We see the same trend. although the model with the most comprehensive features, so age, APOE, and driving, achieved the highest performance, I think the model with driving indicators and age alone can be considered the highest performing, non-invasive, and very easily implantable and cost-effective option that might be worth exploring more. So in summary, our findings really suggest that driving using GPS with age alone or with age and APOE may serve as an accurate and effective digital marker for preclinical Alzheimer's disease. But to further establish this, we needed to compare driving models to other more established biomarkers. And this is the next study that I'm going to talk to you about, where we looked into how naturalistic driving models, machine learning models, compare to established CSF and plasma biomarker in detection of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And this time we define preclinical Alzheimer's disease using the gold standard PET amyloid. So again, the sample was from the same cohort that we talked about before, and they had the same inclusion and exclusion criteria. The only thing that we added here was that all of the participants had to have blood, CSF, and PET biomarker data within 1.5 years of their driving data. So to detect PET amyloid positivity, which is how we define preclinical Alzheimer's disease, we used the following fluid biomarkers. So CSF A-beta-42/40 ratio, and then plasma A-beta-42/40 ratio. And finally, we used amyloid probability score, and this is a model score composite of plasma biomarker, age, and APOE. And we use this recommended threshold for each of these values. Again, we trained 3 driving models, so driving features alone, driving features with age, and driving features with age and APOE. And this time we predicted PET amyloid positivity to define preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So here you can see that for predicting PET amyloid positivity, the CSF biomarkers achieved the highest performance. They got F1 score of 97%, and this is in agreement with what we see in the literature. And this is only in our sample, by the way. And then the next performing model was the machine learning model with driving variables, age, and APOE, which got F1 score of 92%. After that was the driving model based on driving variables and age, which got an F1 score of 81%. And then it was the plasma A-beta-42/40, and then the machine learning model with driving variables alone. And here you can see the area under the curve from all of the models. Using the machine learning model based on driving variables, the area under the curve was 80%. Again, this was improved with adding age to 93, and then further improved to around 97 by adding age and APOE. So this is what we have done so far, but there are a lot of next steps that we're looking to do. And I think the necessary next step for us is to examine and improve the external and internal validity of these digital biomarkers for identifying preclinical Alzheimer's disease. We are interested in testing more advanced mobile technology for identifying better identifying naturalistic driving behavior. So for example, if we could identify turning behavior or lane maintenance behaviors, which have been shown in literature to be associated with dementia. We're interested in adding wearable trackers to our data set to see what their predictive ability would be. We know that a lot of older adults may not drive, so having that as an additional option would be very valuable. And then finally, we're really interested in extending this to different geographical settings. We've seen in our data that people in different locations have different biomarker, different driving behaviors, and it's really important to consider that. So with that being said, I'd like to thank the students and lab members of the Healthy City Lab, the DRIVE research team, the CCNA Team 16 members, and our collaborators. Thanks so much for listening, and I would be happy to take any questions.